Potential deals for Jorgen Strand Larsen and Yoane Wissa seem to be at the same stage. So in this video we're going to be analysing which one is more likely, whether both could arrive, and also discussing what that means for Alexander Isak. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Please do hit subscribe and like if you haven't already, and join the community. Today we're going to be discussing the striker situation once again, with more developments. A bid for Jorgen Strand Larsen, a second bid I should say, for Jorgen Strand Larsen went in yesterday of £55 million, and it was rejected. If you listen to what Vitor Pereira, the Wolves manager, said yesterday after the game against West Ham, in which Jorgen Strand Larsen scored twice in the last 10 minutes to send them through the Carabao Cup, then it doesn't feel like this deal is as difficult to do as maybe I certainly think or have thought. For me, Newcastle are chasing a player who, basically, if they got him, it would give Wolves a real task to stay in the Premier League. It's already quite difficult for them, I think, this season, with having lost Cunha, having not got that much quality across the board and that much depth. If you take a proven Premier League goalscorer, as you have to say that Jorgen Strand Larsen is now, because he scored 14 league goals last season, and previously 13 goals in La Liga for Celta Vigo, then that means that Wolves will really struggle if they don't have him. So to go and buy him for £60 million, that, you know, on the face of it, from a Newcastle perspective, that may seem steep, and I've been through this whole thing. As an Isak replacement, it's not ideal. As a Wilson replacement, I think it really does work as a good power play if you can get him through the door. But the crucial thing is, Wolves would be basically signing over their Premier League status effectively, or risking doing that for the sake of £60 million. Is that worth it for them? Well, if you listen to Vitor Pereira yesterday, as I said, perhaps it is, because he was saying that he wants him to stay, but that every player has his price, and we'll see what happens on this deal. So very similar to Eddie Howe in the way he's dealt with Alexander Isak, you have to say, but the crucial difference is that Newcastle are, by the sounds of it, because there's reports and lots of people saying around 60 million will do this deal. That's what people are saying, and what Newcastle feel comfortable with and confident about, compared to the 40 million difference that is between Liverpool's last bid for Isak and Newcastle's valuation, and that being really, really difficult to overcome. So I'm a little bit more confident about this now than I was, because I feel like if Pereira was certain and Wolves was certain that this deal couldn't be done, they would just say that. They would say he was not for sale at any price. But those comments yesterday do change a lot of things. And yes, Newcastle have had a second bid rejected, but they're not being put off. And these conversations, as I've said so many times, are quite fluid. Not like the phone's been put down and Newcastle will move away. It's that these conversations are very fluid, and it feels like Newcastle have got some progression. They bid 50 million, they weren't put off, they bid 55. Will they go back into the 60 million that apparently will do this deal? And if they do, what do Wolves do then? Because that's effectively what Newcastle we thought was happening with Mark Gahey last year. This is a big warning that I think Newcastle have to heed around these deals with Premier League clubs. It's what I've been saying all summer. Basically, if you go in for these deals, you have to be wary that clubs don't necessarily need the money and do need the player more. And I think that's the case this time. And the timing of the window, it's going to be difficult. So would we see Newcastle go in with 60 million and then Wolves come back and ask for 65 or ask for more? I said 60 million would do this deal at the very start, I think, and these rumours emerged and his name came out as an option. And I've never been fully convinced, but those Pereira comments do make a big difference in my mind, because it didn't feel very committal, it didn't feel very certain, and it's like Eddie Howe with Isak and Newcastle with Isak, but we know what their position is. It's very, very difficult conditions for Liverpool to match. Newcastle's conditions and what they're already offering, it doesn't feel like there's too much difference, and I think that is what the real crux of the matter is here. We'll see if Newcastle go back in with a third bid. It feels like they will, especially if they're this close. But what you'd have to say with 5 days of the window left is asking Wolves what they want as a realistic price, and matching it if you can. If it's 60 million, maybe, you know, maximum 65, who knows, I don't know, but 60 million feels like the number. If it is 60 million, put it on the table and say you've got a deadline, because Newcastle do need to move on and find somebody else if that is the case, because they can't go into this season with just Isak and Asula as the main strikers, with Gordon in there as well, because it's a Champions League campaign. Can you trust Isak? Does Isak really want to reintegrate? We discussed it yesterday. There was talks. We'll talk about this in a minute, more detail. But it feels like Newcastle are at an end game with a striker, because Strand Larsen's keen on the move, just like Wissa is. He hasn't pushed for it in the way that Wissa has. Does that make a difference at this stage? I'm not sure it does, because I don't think Wolves would act any differently if Strand Larsen was refusing to play. He's got on with his job, scored 2 goals last night, got Wolves through to the Carabao Cup third round. As I say, I think he's a brilliant Callum Wilson replacement. He scored 14 goals last season. He's 24. He can improve. He's got really good pedigree as a different type of striker to Isak. But is it possible that he could come in as Isak's replacement in an algorithm Moneyball situation with Wissa coming in as well, and you were basically looking at the whole package of Wilson and Isak and replacing the goals rather than just directly trying to find a player to replace Isak? That hasn't been what Newcastle have looked at doing, but potentially these last 24 hours on the Isak side might change things. I'm not saying, I still stand by my initial stance that Newcastle won't sell, they can't sell, and Isak will be reintegrated, but by the sounds of it, those meetings that they had with Piff and Jamie Rubin didn't create any difference in terms of where Isak's head's at, and he didn't dilute his position. I wrote a piece for Forbes off the back of the Liverpool game discussing Isak and all that. That's down in the description, but in that piece I sort of said that his position will not dilute until Liverpool aren't an option anymore. Even though we see it from Newcastle's perspective, and we see that Newcastle don't want to sell him, they're not going to sell because of the conditions. From his perspective, Liverpool is still there, they still want him, the window is still open, so the whole thing's still active. He's not going to dilute that position until that deal isn't possible at all. I think there's going to be more movement on this. I think there'll be a bid this week, or some thing will happen that will mean that there's an end game before the Leeds game. Whether he reintegrates or trains before Leeds, I don't know. Obviously then there's the international break, and Martin Hardy and a few other people have reported that he will be in the Sweden squad. That isn't a surprise, because John Dahl Thompson's spoken about this and was quite open about the fact that he is protecting Alexander Isak, and Isak is a massive part of his plans. It's not a surprise that he'll be in the Sweden squad at all. Maybe though, if once he comes back, because he'll be there with Krafton and Alanga, it'll be interesting to see what they have to say to him, if there's any conversations. Obviously I'm sure they've spoken away from the training ground, but they haven't seen him at training obviously for weeks now. It'll be interesting to see what that dynamic is like, if anything happens of note. But once Isak comes back, if he's still at Newcastle, I imagine he will reintegrate across, in terms of playing across September and maybe early October at the latest. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's a definitive answer in the next couple of days. Could it be that Yoane Wissa and Strand Larsen are those 2 strikers that Newcastle are accepting, and they will do the deal for Isak after that? I think that's still unlikely, but it could be possible, because Craig Hope has said, as he's reported, the Strand Larsen deal and the Yoane Wissa deal from the very start. I mean, I've got to give Craig Hope his absolute props for this summer. He's been really, really on it with breaking a lot of big stories, including Isak as well. Strand Larsen and Wissa were both named by him early on, and he said that the Wissa deal is still active with more talks today. Is that as an alternative to Strand Larsen? Are they working on both, and they'll make that choice? By the sounds of it, in terms of what Newcastle have been briefing and been saying over the last week, that seems like it could be that way of thinking. But could it be that if both are options, then Newcastle choose to go for both and then sell Isak? I don't think that'll happen, but it would be interesting to see if it did. In terms of Wissa, back in training with Brentford. Brentford are also considering a move for Borussia Dortmund striker Max Bayer, which would be a Wissa replacement, which could unlock Wissa, so there's possibility on the Wissa side as well. All of these things are still active. There's 5 days to go in the window. You can't call anything. My thought, though, is that it is one of those 2 players. Is Strand Larsen becoming the priority over Wissa? For me, I think I would rather pay a little bit extra for Strand Larsen. I think his ceiling's higher. I know he didn't score as many goals as Wissa last season. Wissa scored 19 non-penalty Premier League goals last year, and that's not to be sniffed at, but he's 28. There's 4 years difference, and I think Strand Larsen can reach Champions League level. I genuinely believe that. I don't think he'll ever be on Isak's level, but Newcastle have to be really frank about this and admit that they're not going to find a striker, at least until next summer, who is on the level of anything that Isak has ever been, really, and in terms of his ceiling. So I think Strand Larsen or Wissa is the Wilson replacement and Isak staying is still Newcastle's plan. I think that can be achieved once Liverpool are not at the table, and then there may be a new contract that was mentioned this week. We'll see how that progresses, but I think everything, it was reported as big breaking news and big sort of damaging things for Newcastle that the Isak meeting didn't change anything. But if you think about it, why would it change anything? Because from Isak's perspective, Liverpool are still very much active. Liverpool are still there. The possibility is still there for him to leave, so he won't dilute his stance until he can't, and he'll probably only listen to Liverpool saying that, but I think Liverpool are listening to Newcastle, so Newcastle remain in control of the situation. The crucial thing is, ever since it was announced by David Ornstein that he doesn't want to play for Newcastle ever again, he didn't mention that in his statement. He hasn't been, and nothing's been briefed about that since. Lots of things have been briefed that he may step back from this stance if the Liverpool deal can't be done. And I think that is eventually what will happen. Newcastle still want that to happen, but it is also more difficult for him to reintegrate by the day. It would have been very, very good and easy to save face if he had done that this week and had said, well, let's see, or something. But at the moment, it feels like his stance isn't changing completely. He is so committed to Liverpool. He's not committed to Newcastle. So that means that he doesn't want to discuss anything. And that makes it difficult, I think, more difficult to see how this is done. I still think it will be done. There's always a way back. But we've been through situations where he could have blamed the agent. That's no longer possible because of his statement. We've been through situations where he thought, maybe I went too far. If he was going to say that, the meeting would have gone a little bit better this week. So he is so committed. It'll be interesting to see how they reintegrate him. But if he's still at the club by September, then I think that will happen. I know a lot of people in the comment section will just say, sign Strand Larsen, sign Wissa, and then sell him. But with 5 days to go in the window, those are 3 massive deals, and there's a massive swing that has to happen. I just don't see it happening because Wolves' position is what it is, Brentford's position is what it is, and Newcastle's position is what it is. They're all very much in the same boat, not wanting to move their player on until they get the suitable conditions. It's all a big game of chess. It's a big game of chicken. Who blinks first? And with 5 days to go in the window, I don't think Newcastle will want to lose Isak. I think they will look at bringing in one of Strand Larsen and Wissa. Strand Larsen feels like it's very much doable because of what Vitor Pereira has said over the last 24 hours, but buyer in the interest from Brentford could then reopen the Wissa situation. Do Newcastle have 2 live options? Do they have any other possible options as well? We'll see how it goes, but I do want to just say one more thing. I think this is why this is the second summer in a row that Newcastle have gone right to the wire, needing replacements in this sort of realm in this sort of part of the window, and I think it's really difficult and dangerous to get there. I think you should always be active until the window shuts, if possible, but you want to have all your positions filled and then see what's out there, see what possibilities are there, because players become available, desperate for moves, things change late in the window, and there are opportunities that arrive. That's why deadline day is what it is. But Newcastle can't be in that mess and that chaos trying to get a deal of somebody that they need, and they really need a striker. It's a really dangerous situation, just like they really needed Mark Gahey last year, and they bid for Elanga on deadline day in a panic, and it didn't work. And I think they need to avoid all of that. And yes, they've been unlucky with people rejecting them, and we've been through all this. There's been so many that maybe they've got their tactics wrong early, all of those things, and maybe they've been punished for being too ambitious. It's all down to opinions and interpretations at that stage. But to me, Newcastle have got themselves in a position again for the second summer in a row where they need somebody. Even when they signed Isak late in the window, it was more opportunistic. It was more Wilson got injured. Newcastle needed somebody. They had the power. They had the money. They had the ability to go and sell that project at the time. And they went and basically did that power move and said to Real Sociedad, there's your money, and took him. Can they do that to Wolves? Can they do that to Brentford? It's much more difficult in Premier League teams because they have more money, but also they have more desperation, because Wissa and Strand Larsen could be the difference between those two clubs staying up this season. Maybe not for Brentford if they get Max Bayer. Wolves also do seem open to the idea of selling Strand Larsen, so we'll see how it all plays out over the next couple of days. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of NUFC Transfer Daily. Like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you then. Cheers.